I always considered Venice my daughter. I married her mother, Yolanda, when Venice was just 6 years old, and while she had a biological father, he was never involved. By the time Yolanda and I divorced, Venice was already 13. But that didn't change how I felt about her. Blood or not, she was my kid. Even after the divorce, I stayed in Venice's life. We talked regularly and she often visited. When she got accepted into her dream college, she was ecstatic but worried about the cost. Yolanda wasn't great with money, and Venice knew she'd either have to take on loans or rely on scholarships to get through. That's when I told her I would take care of it. I still remember the way her face lit up when I told her. She threw her arms around me, thanking me over and over again. She knew I didn't have to do this, but I wanted to. It was something I promised myself I'd do for her. Yolanda, on the other hand, didn't see it that way. The moment she found out, she called me, her tone sharp and accusatory. She said that it was unfair for me to pay for Venice's college while her other kids, her two younger children with the man she cheated on me with, got nothing. She claimed that if I truly saw myself as part of Venice's life, I should see her whole family as mine too. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. I told her I had no relationship with those kids. They weren't mine. I never raised them, never had any bond with them, and I certainly didn't owe them a college education. Yolanda didn't like that answer. She started ranting about how I was trying to divide her children, making Venice feel more special than the others, and setting a precedent that would ruin their family dynamic. I told her that was her problem, not mine. And that's when she gave me the ultimatum. She told me that if I wasn't willing to pay for all of her kids, then I wasn't allowed to pay for Venice either. She said it wouldn't be fair otherwise, and that Venice would have to understand that family means everyone is treated equally. I was furious. I asked her if she was seriously willing to sabotage her daughter's future just because she didn't get her way. Her response? She said Venice would survive like everyone else. She'd take out loans, get a job, and figure it out. And maybe that was for the best because then Venice would learn what it meant to struggle just like her siblings would. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I told Yolanda that she was being selfish and controlling. I said I wasn't backing down and that Venice's education was something I wanted to do for her, no matter what Yolanda thought. Yolanda doubled down, saying that if I went behind her back and paid anyway, she would make sure Venice knew how unfair it was to her siblings. She claimed Venice would eventually resent me for dividing their family. I told her I didn't care what lies she wanted to spin. Venice was an adult, and she would make her own choices. Yolanda hung up on me after that. I sat there, trying to process the conversation. I knew Yolanda had always been manipulative, but this was a new low even for her. She wasn't just trying to control me, she was trying to control Venice's future. She was purposefully sabotaging her. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed with a message from Venice. She asked if she could come over. I could tell from her wording that something was wrong. I told her, of course. When she arrived, she looked frustrated and exhausted. She didn't even wait to sit down before launching into what had happened. Yolanda had confronted her right after our phone call. She told Venice she wouldn't allow her to take money from me unless her siblings got the same. She tried to spin it as being fair, but Venice saw right through it. Venice was furious. She told her mom that this wasn't about fairness, this was about control. She asked why Yolanda was punishing her for having someone in her life who actually cared. Yolanda turned the conversation into an emotional guilt trip. She said Venice was lucky to have me, but her other kids weren't as fortunate. She said if Venice really cared about her family, she would understand why this needed to be equal. Venice asked her if she seriously expected me to take responsibility for the kids that weren't mine, and that too, after she cheated on me. Yolanda snapped, telling Venice that she was being selfish and that she should be grateful for the sacrifices her mother made for her. That was when Venice packed a bag and left. She told me she needed space from her mom, at least for a few days. I told her she was welcome to stay as long as she needed. As we sat in my living room, Venice sighed and looked at me with tired eyes. She said she hated how her mom always made everything about herself. She said she was tired of Yolanda making her feel guilty for simply having a supportive parental figure. I told her she didn't owe Yolanda anything. She nodded, but I could tell it still hurt. We spent the rest of the evening talking about her college plans, her excitement about moving, and everything she hoped to experience. I could see the weight lifting off her shoulders as we spoke. But then her phone buzzed. Yolanda was texting her nonstop, message after message, switching between anger, guilt, and desperate pleas. Venice sighed and put her phone down. She looked at me and said she had already made up her mind. She was going to take my offer. Yolanda could be as angry as she wanted. Venice wasn't going to let her control this. I told her I was proud of her, but in the back of my mind, I knew this wasn't over. Yolanda wasn't the type to let things go. And I had a bad feeling that her reaction to Venice's decision was going to be explosive. Update 1. I woke up the next morning to a dozen missed calls from Yolanda. Predictable. Venice was still asleep in the guest room, exhausted from everything. I grabbed a cup of coffee and braced myself before listening to Yolanda's voicemails. First few were the usual demands that I reconsider, accusations of favoritism, and rants about how I was destroying her family. Then, as the voicemails went on, she switched to guilt tripping. She claimed that I had turned Venice against her, that Venice wouldn't be acting like this if I hadn't swooped in and poisoned her mind. The last few were a mix of angry and desperate. The final one ending with her snapping that she hoped I was happy for making her daughter abandon her own family. I ignored them all without a second thought. By the time Venice woke up, I had breakfast ready. She looked at me hesitantly as if expecting bad news. I kept my voice light and told her Yolanda had been calling, but that it wasn't anything we hadn't already expected. Venice sighed and shook her head, muttering that her mom was relentless. She pulled out her phone, staring at it for a long time before finally unlocking it. I watched her expression shift as she scrolled through her messages. Apparently, after I hadn't answered her, Yolanda had moved on to Venice, flooding her with texts, voice messages, and even a few passive-aggressive Facebook posts about ungrateful children. But the worst was the messages from her half-siblings. Yolanda had clearly gotten them involved. Venice's younger brother, who was around 14, had sent her a message saying their mom was crying all night. Her younger sister had sent something similar, telling Venice that their mom was heartbroken and begging her to just listen to her. Then there was a message from Yolanda's husband, Venice's stepfather. It was short, cold, and straight to the point. You're being selfish. This family has always taken care of you, and now you want to throw us away for money. Venice read that one out loud, shaking her head in disbelief before slamming her phone down on the table. She looked up at me, anger and frustration clear in her voice as she said she hated how they always did this. How Yolanda always twisted the narrative until Venice was the villain. How her siblings, who had never been treated like second-class citizens the way she had no idea what it felt like. I told her she didn't owe them anything. She nodded, but I could tell she was still hurt. Then came the knock at the door. I already knew who it was before I even got up. Yolanda wasn't the type to let things go. I opened the door to see her standing there, arms crossed, looking as if she hadn't slept all night. She pushed past me into the house, not even waiting for an invitation. Venice immediately stiffened when she saw her, and Yolanda wasted no time launching into her speech. She said Venice was being manipulated by me. She said I had filled Venice's head with ideas that weren't true, that I was trying to turn her against her real family. She turned to me, eyes flashing with anger, and demanded that I stay out of their family business. I stayed silent, arms crossed, letting her dig her own grave. Venice, however, wasn't having it. She told Yolanda to stop making everything about herself. She said this wasn't about me or about Yolanda's other kids or about anything except the fact that Yolanda had never prioritized her. She said Yolanda has spent her entire life treating her like an outsider, and now that someone actually wanted to support her, Yolanda was trying to sabotage it. Yolanda scoffed, calling Venice dramatic. She said Venice would understand when she was older that life wasn't about just thinking of yourself. She told Venice that family meant making sacrifices and that she was choosing to be selfish. Venice's face hardened. She told Yolanda she was done with the guilt tripping, done with being treated like she owed them something just because she existed. She said Yolanda could be as angry as she wanted, but she wasn't changing her decision. Yolanda's jaw tightened. Then she turned back to me, saying that if I was such a generous person, why wouldn't I just do the right thing and help all her kids? She asked how I could live with myself knowing I was creating division in their family. I told her I wasn't creating division, she was. I said Venice had made her choice, and instead of respecting it, Yolanda was throwing a tantrum like a child who didn't get her way. Yolanda's face turned red with anger, and she turned back to Venice, voice rising as she said that if Venice walked away from this family now, she shouldn't expect to come back when things got hard. Venice took a deep breath, looked at her mother straight in the eyes, and said she didn't plan on coming back at all. Yolanda was stunned. For the first time in this entire mess, she actually looked speechless. She took a step back, blinking as if she hadn't expected Venice to say something so final. Then she scoffed, shaking her head as she muttered that Venice was making the biggest mistake of her life. I told her to get out before I called security. She turned on her heels and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. The silence after she left was thick. Venice sat down heavily on the couch, rubbing her temples. I sat next to her, waiting. After a few minutes, she let out a deep breath and looked at me. She said she didn't think her mom would ever push her this far, but now she realized there was no going back. I told her that sometimes the best thing you can do for yourself is to walk away from people who refuse to respect you. She nodded, her expression still conflicted but steady. Then she said something I wasn't expecting. She said she wanted to cut contact for good. I raised an eyebrow, asking if she was sure. She nodded, saying she was tired of being the disposable child, tired of feeling guilty for simply wanting support. She said she wasn't going to waste any more years of her life trying to make Yolanda see her worth. I told her that whatever she chose, I'd support her. Venice smiled at that, tired but relieved. That was when her phone buzzed again. She glanced at it, expecting more drama, but then her face changed. She looked up at me confused before saying it was her uncle, Yolanda's brother. Apparently, he had seen the Facebook posts, seen the way Yolanda was spinning the story, and he wasn't buying it. He asked Venice if she was okay, and when she told him everything, he told her that Yolanda was out of line. Venice hesitated before asking me if she should reply. I told her it was up to her, but it sounded like she finally had someone in her family who actually cared. She took a deep breath and typed back. Update 2. Venice spent most of the day texting back and forth with her uncle, updating him on everything that had happened, It was the first time she felt like someone from her mother's side actually listened without making her feel like she was crazy. Her uncle, Gavin, had always been different from Yolanda. He wasn't overly involved in family drama, but he had never been outright dismissive either. He told Venice that he had suspected for years that Yolanda treated her differently, but he hadn't realized how bad it was. He admitted he had always thought Venice was just distant by choice, not because Yolanda had pushed her out. Venice told him everything. How Yolanda always made her feel like a burden, how her stepfather never saw her as his responsibility, how she had to fight for the smallest scraps of attention, only to be ignored when it came to important things. Gavin didn't try to excuse Yolanda's behavior, he just listened. At one point, Venice handed me the phone so I could read a few of his messages. He had written that he didn't agree with Yolanda's demand for me to pay for all of her kids, and he thought it was completely unfair of her to act as if Venice owed her loyalty when she had never earned it. He also said he would try talking to her, but he wasn't sure how much good it would do. Venice snorted when she read that part. She told me she liked her uncle, but if he thought Yolanda would suddenly develop self-awareness, he was out of his mind. Still, she seemed lighter after talking to him. That was until the group chat exploded. At some point in the evening, Yolanda had apparently decided to make this everyone's problem. She sent a long, dramatic message in the family group chat, talking about how heartbroken she was that Venice had turned on her. She said Venice had abandoned her family for money and was now choosing to erase her siblings from her life. Venice clenched her jaw as she read it. Then came the replies. A few aunts and uncles said they were sorry she was going through this and that family was complicated. Some cousins said they hoped things would work out, but then Yolanda's husband chimed in. He went on a rant about how disappointed he was in Venice, how she was being selfish, how she was disrespecting her mother after everything Yolanda had done for her. He accused her of chasing after a man's money instead of being a good daughter. Venice let out a bitter laugh at that one. Then her younger siblings joined in. Her brother sent a long message saying he didn't understand why Venice hated them. He said they had never done anything to her, so why was she leaving them behind? Her sister said she was crying because she thought Venice would always be there for them. That's when Venice shut off her phone. She exhaled sharply, rubbing her temples, and said she was done. She wasn't going to spend the rest of the night reading more manipulative nonsense. I told her she didn't have to explain herself to anyone. She nodded but stayed quiet after that. I could tell that despite everything, part of her still felt guilty. She wasn't heartless. She loved her siblings, but she also knew she had to protect herself. The silence stretched for a while, and then, as if on cue, my own phone rang. I glanced at the screen. Yolanda. Venice groaned. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again. Venice rolled her eyes and told me to just answer it so that she could hear what nonsense her mom was spewing this time. I sighed and picked up. Yolanda's voice was sharp the moment I said hello. She asked me if I was happy now. I stayed silent, letting her go on. She accused me of turning her daughter against her. She said I had filled Venice's head with lies, that I had manipulated her into cutting off her family. I calmly told her that Venice made her own choices. That only made her angrier. She went on about how Venice had been brainwashed by me, how she was just a young girl who didn't understand what she was doing. She kept saying that if I was truly a good person, I would have convinced Venice to stay in their lives instead of encouraging her to leave. Then she switched tactics. She asked me if I really wanted to be responsible for Venice losing her entire family. She said that if I didn't convince Venice to apologize, she would regret it for the rest of her life. She said Venice would eventually realize she made a mistake, and when that day came, it would be too late. I had to bite back a laugh. I told Yolanda that she was the one who made Venice feel like an outsider for years. She had no one to blame but herself for the consequences. Yolanda snapped that I had no right to interfere in their family matters. I told her that was funny considering she had no problem demanding my money just yesterday. There was a long silence. Then, in a clipped voice, she said that if I was going to keep poisoning her daughter against her, then I needed to stay out of their lives completely. I told her that was just fine by me, and then I hung up. Venice had been listening the whole time, shaking her head. She said it was amazing how Yolanda could twist everything into making herself the victim. I asked her if she was okay. She took a deep breath, then nodded. She said she was angry, but mostly she just felt tired. She was tired of the same cycle, tired of always being the bad guy in Yolanda's story. Then, a little while later, Venice's phone rang again. She hesitated before answering. It was her uncle. She put it on speaker. Gavin sighed on the other end and said he had tried to talk to Yolanda, but she wasn't budging. He said she was completely convinced that Venice was being manipulated and that she was telling everyone in the family that Venice had abandoned them for money. Venice rolled her eyes and said she wasn't surprised. Then Gavin said something that made us both pause. He said that Yolanda wasn't just ranting to family anymore. Apparently, she had started calling around to mutual friends, spreading the story that I had stolen her daughter from her. She was telling people that I had cut her off financially out of spite and was using money to control Venice. Venice looked at me, horrified. I just sighed, rubbing my temples. Yolanda really didn't know when to stop. Venice turned back to the phone and asked Gavin if people were actually believing it. Gavin hesitated before saying that while most people knew Yolanda was dramatic, some were definitely falling for it. He said Venice might want to get ahead of it before Yolanda completely controlled the narrative. Venice exhaled sharply, nodding. Then she asked Gavin something unexpected. She asked if he thought she was overreacting by cutting Yolanda off completely. Gavin was quiet for a moment and then he said no. He said Yolanda had spent years pushing her aside and now she was just mad that Venice finally had the strength to push back. Venice thanked him. When she hung up, she turned to me and asked if I thought Yolanda would ever stop. I told her no, but I also told her that it didn't matter because this time Venice was done playing her game. Update 3. Venice had spent her whole life biting her tongue, backing down and trying to keep the peace with her mother. But this time, something inside her snapped. She wasn't just done, she was furious. I could see it. Yolanda had spent years treating her like an afterthought, making her feel like she was never enough. Now, after Venice had finally chosen to walk away, Yolanda had the audacity to act like the victim. She had the nerve to cry about being abandoned while spreading lies to anyone who would listen. No, not this time. Venice wasn't going to let Yolanda control the narrative. She grabbed her phone, opened the family group chat, and started typing. Her hands were steady, her anger sharp and focused. She didn't sugarcoat anything. She told him exactly why she had cut Yolanda off. She said she laid out the years of neglect, the way Yolanda had made it clear she was never as important as her younger siblings, the way Yolanda had dismissed her struggles, ignored her needs, and only cared about her when it was convenient. She told them how Yolanda had expected her to just fall in line, to be the dutiful daughter even when Yolanda had treated her like an outsider in her own home. She told them how the moment she finally had something for herself, an opportunity, a future, the support of someone who actually cared, Yolanda had tried to rip it away. She wrote that Yolanda had never cared about fairness. She had only cared about control. And when she couldn't control Venice anymore, she tried to manipulate her into coming back by playing the victim. Then Venice ended it with this. I didn't leave because of money. I left because I refused to keep begging for love from a mother who never wanted me to begin with. And if you think I'm being selfish for finally putting myself first, then you were never really in my corner anyway." She hit send and tossed the phone onto the couch. The silence in the room was heavy. I watched her carefully, waiting to see if she'd regret it, but she didn't. Instead, she leaned back, crossed her arms, and let out a slow breath. "She's going to lose it," she muttered, almost amused. And she was right. Not 5 minutes later, Yolanda started calling over and over, back to back, like a woman possessed. When Venice didn't answer, Yolanda switched to texts, long, furious messages that started with outrage and then switched to guilt-tripping and then circled back to rage again. Venice barely glanced at them before blocking her number. Then, as if Yolanda could sense she'd lost control of that avenue, the calls started coming to me. I picked up the first one just to see what she would try this time. Yolanda didn't even say hello. She demanded to know what I had allowed Venice to do. I told her that Venice wasn't a child. She didn't need my permission for anything. Yolanda scoffed and spat that Venice was being dramatic, that she didn't mean half of what she said, and that she was just acting out because I had put ideas in her head. I told her Venice had been holding those feelings in for years, and the only person she had to blame was herself. Yolanda ignored that completely and switched tactics. She started crying, loud, dramatic sobs that didn't sound the least bit genuine. She said she was heartbroken, that she had only ever done her best, and that she didn't understand why Venice hated her. I had no patience for it. I told her that Venice didn't hate her. She just finally saw her for who she was. I also told her to get some acting classes, and then I hung up. Venice snorted. "That was satisfying," she muttered. At this point, Yolanda was just entertainment for us. But the fight wasn't over yet. Yolanda was relentless. When she realized she couldn't reach either of us, she took it online again. That evening, Venice's phone blew up with messages from old friends, distant relatives, and even some of her mother's acquaintances. Yolanda had made a public Facebook post, a long manipulative rant about how her ungrateful daughter had cut her off after everything she had done for her. She wrote about how Venice had been stolen from her by a man who only cared about money, and how she was heartbroken that her daughter had been poisoned against her own family. She painted herself as the perfect, loving mother who was now being unfairly discarded. And worst of all, she made it public. Venice's jaw clenched as she scrolled through the comments. Most of them were from Yolanda's friends, blindly supporting her, telling her they were so sorry for what she was going through, and that they couldn't believe how cruel Venice was being. But a few stood out. Some cousins had commented that there were two sides to every story. One of Venice's childhood friends had asked, "Did you ever even ask Venice why she cut you off?" And then there was her Uncle Gavin. His comment was short and to the point. "This isn't the whole truth, Yolanda, and you know it." Venice smirked at that. Then she set her phone down, picked mine up, and asked if she could use my Facebook account. I raised a brow, but handed it over. She went straight to the post and left a comment under her uncle's. She didn't write a long emotional response. She didn't defend herself. She didn't try to explain. She just wrote, "If you want to know the truth, just ask me." Then she logged out, set my phone down, and crossed her arms. She wants a war? Fine, let's have a war. I asked if she was sure she wanted to do this. She nodded. She doesn't get to control my story anymore. And just like that, Venice had flipped the script. She wasn't playing defense anymore. She was fighting back. And Yolanda? She had no idea what was coming. Update 4. Yolanda was losing control and she knew it. Venice's simple comment on Facebook had done more damage than 1,000 arguments ever could. It wasn't just some emotional outburst, it was an invitation, an open challenge, and people were taking her up on it. Venice's inbox was flooded. Some messages were from distant family members who wanted to hear her side of things. Others were from people who hadn't spoken to in years, apologizing for believing Yolanda's lies. And then there were the messages from her younger siblings, conflicted, uncertain, clearly struggling with the realization that maybe, just maybe, their mother wasn't telling them the full story. It was exactly what Yolanda had been trying to avoid. For years, she had controlled the narrative, spinning reality in whatever direction suited her best. But now, with Venice refusing to stay silent, the cracks in Yolanda's carefully curated image were widening. And she was furious. It didn't take long for her to retaliate. 2 days after Venice's comment, Yolanda made another post, longer, angrier, and even more desperate than the first. This time, she wasn't just playing the victim. She accused Venice of turning into a spoiled brat after moving in with me, claiming that I had manipulated her into cutting ties with her real family. She called Venice ungrateful, selfish, and heartless, saying she had abandoned her mother and siblings all because she wanted to chase riches. But the worst part? She threw in a thinly veiled threat. Yolanda wrote that Venice would regret this one day, that family was forever, and she would learn the hard way that burning bridges always came back to haunt her. It was an obvious attempt to scare her, to guilt her into backing down. It didn't work. Venice didn't even flinch. Instead, she grabbed my phone, showed me the post, and smirked. She pointed out how Yolanda was panicking. I could hear it in her voice, the satisfaction, the quiet triumph. Yolanda had been pushing her around for years, always holding something over her head, always making her feel like she had no power. But now? The power was shifting. Venice wasn't scared of her anymore. She was ready to end this once and for all. That night, she went to live on her own account. No fancy setup, no script, just her sitting on my couch looking directly into the camera. She started by saying she never wanted to do this publicly. But since her mother insisted on dragging her through the mud in front of everyone, she had no choice but to set the record straight. Then she laid everything out. She spoke about growing up feeling like an outsider in her own home, about how Yolanda's love had always come with conditions. She explained that after the divorce, Yolanda had made it painfully clear that she didn't really care about her, only about controlling her. She talked about how I had been the only one who stepped up for her, about how Yolanda had never put in the effort to be a real mother, but still expected blind loyalty. She told them about how I had stepped up and she considered me her real father. Then she got to the real reason behind all of this, the money. She told everyone the only reason Yolanda was suddenly acting like a devoted mother was because she wanted financial support for her other kids, the ones she had with her affair partner who she married after cheating on me. And when Venice refused to be used as a bank account, Yolanda turned against her. This lasted maybe 10 minutes, but that was all it took. By the next morning, the damage was done. Yolanda's latest post was flooded with comments calling her out. People who had originally sided with her were now second-guessing everything. Some of her own friends even said they had always wondered why she treated Venice differently. Yolanda tried to delete the comments, but they kept coming. Her younger kids, Venice's half-siblings, started asking questions. Venice showed me the texts one by one. Her younger sister asked if what she said was true. Her sister admitted that their mother had always treated Venice differently, but that he had been too scared to say anything because she didn't understand. And then the kicker, her brother, Yolanda's golden child, sent a single text apologizing. That one made Venice pause. She stared at the screen for a long time before setting the phone down. She admitted she didn't even know how to respond to that. I told her she didn't have to respond at all, but I knew it meant something. For years, Yolanda had pitted her kids against each other, but now the lies were unraveling, and even the ones who had been the most loyal to her were starting to see the truth. Yolanda must have sensed it too, because by the end of the week, she did something drastic. She showed up at my house unannounced again. Venice and I had just sat down for dinner when we heard the knock. I checked the doorbell camera and immediately sighed. It was Yolanda, and she looked unhinged. Venice saw my face and tensed, immediately guessing that Yolanda was here. I nodded. For a moment, Venice hesitated. Then, with a deep breath, she stood up and marched straight to the door. I followed, ready to intervene if needed, but Venice was completely calm. She swung the door open and stared Yolanda down. Yolanda looked rough. Her hair was messy, her eyes were red, and she was gripping her phone so tightly her knuckles were white. Yolanda started with a pitiful voice asking if they could talk. Venice's expression didn't change. She simply said no. She made sure Yolanda didn't come in. Yolanda's lip trembled before she tried again, saying she just wanted to fix things. Venice let out a humorless laugh and repeated the words, fix things, like she was testing how ridiculous they sounded. She then said Yolanda meant to fix the fact that no one was buying her lies anymore. Yolanda flinched. Then her face twisted with anger. She snapped that Venice had no idea what she was doing, that she thought this was some kind of game and that she enjoyed ruining her. Venice's expression hardened. She said she thought Yolanda had done that all on her own. Yolanda looked like she wanted to argue, but before she could, Venice took a step back and started closing the door. Yolanda panicked, her voice rising, trying to get Venice to listen. Venice didn't let her finish. She looked her mother dead in the eye and told her that she did understand. That was why she was done. And with that, she was gone. And it was finally over. Thanks for all your support. Stay tuned for more stories from Argo Relationships.